TIE fighters suck. There it is. That is the thesis of the video right there in 3 little words. Slap them on a thumbnail, put it in the title, and let's just call it a day, friendos. You want a YouTube video that gets straight to the point? Boom, there's your point. In fact, I'm gonna take it a step further. Not only do TIE fighters, one of the most iconic starships to come out of the Star Wars canon, suck, but their basic design failures are the single biggest reason the Empire lost to a small ragtag bunch of rebels.
Everything is proceeding as I have foreseen.
If that's the case there, pal, it's too bad you didn't foresee the need to hire more aeronautics engineers. Hello, Internet! Welcome to Film Theory, the show that may not have the droids you're looking for, but does have the content you'll subscribe for. So, Obi-Wan Kenobi just finished out its run over on Disney Plus, and it was a show that existed. Some really high highs, some really low lows. But despite being a mixed bag, it did exactly what Disney intended. Got me thinking about Star Wars again, so good job, Mouse. You won this round. And my first thought was this. Have you ever truly stopped to think about what a bizarre cultural mishmash Star Wars actually is? I mean, you've got intense Akira Kurosawa samurai sword fights, pulpy retro Flash Gordon-esque space adventure, intense allusions to Vietnam warfare, intergalactic C-SPAN, a heavy dose of old-timey westerns, and heck, why not even throw in some horrible daytime soap opera romance for good measure?
I don't like sand.
Truly a little something for everybody, huh, George? One of the most interesting additions, though, are the spaceship battles with starfighters that were clearly inspired by footage of dogfights from World War II. And that being said, am I the only guy who ever noticed that a lot of the good guy ships are named after letters in the English alphabet? Got the X-Wing, the Y-Wing, the A-Wing. I mean, it's cool and all, but there's just one tiny problem. Pretty much no one in the galaxy uses those letters. Not even joking. The galaxy's default writing system in the Star Wars universe is Aurebesh. If you dig deep enough into the lore, you can find that English letters do exist as something called High Galactic, but it's only used by snobby rich people. Not exactly the best look to have your grassroots rebellion naming things like Elon Musk names his kid. Looks like the new trilogy wasn't the only thing making up stuff as it went along.
Oh, they fly now! They fly now? They fly now!
Anyway, today we're not talking about any of those ships. Instead, we're focused on the Imperial TIE Fighter, backbone of the Empire's Navy. A ship with an iconic look and an even more iconic sound. Speaking of the shape, the TIE Fighter supposedly got its name from its twin ion engines, TIE. Not the fact that George Lucas thought the design looked like bow ties. Because let's face it, it's an easy mistake to make considering that this is the same guy who named an overweight X-Wing pilot Porkins and a drug dealer Sleazebagano. Ugh, real creative on the names there, George. Anyway, I don't care how they were named, the TIE Fighters are garbage and they cost the Empire its galactic dominance. And let me be clear, I'm not talking about deeply complicated lore stuff here either. These things ignore fundamentals of dogfighting that are so basic, even the video game Star Fox got them right. And we all know how accurate Star Fox was.
Do a barrel roll!
TLDR, Emperor Sheev needs to have his men go watch Top Gun Maverick or something, because Tom Cruise would be so disappointed in them right now. So today we're going in on a bombing run that's gonna destroy your faith in the TIE Fighter in order to show how a few simple design mistakes can let some nerf herders overthrow a galactic superpower. Let's start off with some backstory, shall we? In universe, the TIE Fighters were the brainchild of Imperial Governor Grand Moff Tarkin, who demanded the creation of a new ship that was both fast and maneuverable while remaining cheap to produce. Within just 5 years, the starfighters used by the Fallen Republic were completely phased out in favor of the TIEs. On a surface level, this makes sense. The galaxy was no longer embroiled in an all-out war with two sides of roughly equal power. Instead, the Empire was facing smaller, weaker internal rebellions. Hoping to overwhelm those insurrections with numbers seemed like it would be a valid strategy. But once you start to break down how the TIEs were designed, you start running into one major problem over and over and over again: sightlines. As you can see, TIEs were designed with a single large window at the front of the ship. While that creates an immediately recognizable and iconic design, it is horrible for dogfighting, which, go figure, was the entire purpose of the dang ship. If you want to see firsthand just how bad the visibility in the TIE would be, hop into a game of Star Wars Squadrons, space combat simulation video game that lets players take direct control of all the franchise's starships. When you hop into an X-Wing, you get an immediate sense of how much the rebel pilots can see with their clear canopies, cockpits featuring glass in every direction that you can turn your head. But inside a TIE Fighter, what do you see? Sure, you have the window in front of you, but everywhere else, metal. Above you, metal. Behind you, metal. Either side, metal. Maybe you got a few slats to peek through at best, but that was it. To compare to a modern fighter jet, let's take a look at the United States' F-35 Lightning II, a multi-role fighter intended to be one of the Air Force's primary aircraft. During the prototype phase, pilots complained of a huge blind spot behind the pilot, large enough to be detrimental to their performance in close quarters dogfighting. As one pilot commented, quote, "Aft visibility will get the pilot gunned every time." The problem came from the headrest. Apparently it was blocking the view directly behind the pilot. To my knowledge and research, despite sensors making up for the lack of visibility, the physical issue was never actually addressed. But that physical issue would be made hundreds of times worse in the TIE Fighter, because without visibility, it gives up every advantage that comes from the ship's increased maneuverability. And this isn't just me making stuff up. Just look at any space battle from any installment in Star Wars. When given a full 360 canopy dome for their ship, people use it. They use it to look around for threats, new targets, or just check on the other pilots that they're flying with. I mean, in this scene alone from the beginning of A New Hope's trench run,
my scope's negative, I don't see anything.
Pick up your visual scanning.
Here they come.
I can't see it!
we hear that the scanners aren't picking up fighters, so instead the pilots are told to physically check the space around them. When Luke is told to watch his back, he literally turns around to watch his back. Meanwhile, let's see how it works with the TIE Fighters. Ramrod straight ahead like they're at the DMV taking a driver's license photo, because they can't see in any other direction. So you would expect then that a lot of their deaths would be surprise attacks from behind. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what we see. Rebel ships pulling up behind them and knocking the TIE Fighters out of the air before anyone checks a scanner. And I should probably call out the continuity flaw in these things, where from the outside, the cockpit window frames are arranged with the metal lining pointing directly up and down, but from the inside, those windows are rotated slightly so the metal lining's diagonal. Just saying, these things suck for lots of reasons. But the bad sight lines are only made worse once you consider the life support systems that are built into these things. Look at what TIE Fighter pilots in the movies have to wear. Masks with breathing tubes, while every other sort of pilot gets to sit comfortably with only a helmeted visor. That's not an aesthetic choice. The in-universe explanation is that the Imperial-era TIE Fighters weren't outfitted with basic life support systems. TIE pilots had to wear full, uncomfortable spacesuits while flying their ships in order to avoid suffocating or freezing to death inside their own cockpit. Now, if those spacesuits are anything like the NASA suits from around the same time as when the movies came out, then they would be heavy and cumbersome, putting TIE pilots at a massive disadvantage as they attempted to navigate the controls. Remember, in a dogfight, the difference of a second in reaction times can determine who lives and who dies. But that's not even what I really care about here. Top pilots have been wearing breathing masks for decades because of G-forces. No, the bigger issue here, again, is sight lines. Because they're having to wear this full protective armor inside the cockpit of a TIE Fighter, their heads are fully encased in a helmet with two tiny small little eye holes. Suddenly their visibility goes from this to this. Add in the window and it crops it down even further to this. Now compare that to the sight lines of the Rebel pilots. Pilots flying inside a ship stocked with life support. The visors on their helmets are wide and completely open, giving them, once again, full sight lines. You'd think at this point that I'd be done, but it gets even worse. As if the window placement and helmet weren't doing enough to make the pilots virtually blind, adding insult to injury are the giant wings on these things, which are blocking even more of your peripheral vision when looking forward. And that's without me even calling out the obvious. These wings are literally a giant target. What's gonna be easier to hit? A thin, relatively horizontal Rebel plane, or a giant array of solar panels measuring in at 6.7 meters by 8.82 meters? That is 22 feet by 29 feet. For context, that is 1/4 the size of a tennis court. I know that stormtroopers can't aim to save their lives, but geez, miss those wings and it's literally the definition of missing the broadside of a barn. And you see, getting hit really matters with the TIE Fighter. I mean, let's be honest, it's gonna matter to any plane, but to the TIE Fighter, any hit is extremely detrimental. Remember what I said about Grand Moff Tarkin wanting these things to be cheaply made? Well, as a cost-saving maneuver, he had them built without shields. Yep, you heard that one right. No shields. I mean, just look at the Millennium Falcon. Our heroes spend the better part of 6 movies joking about how this thing is a piece of junk that's constantly falling apart. And yet, even it had shields because it was flying in dangerous situations like smuggling and warfare.
Sir, we just lost the main rear deflector shield. One more direct hit on the back quarter and we're done for.
But the most common TIE Fighters used by the Imperial Navy? No shields, none. That's why we see TIE Fighters exploding over and over and over again anytime they're hit by a single laser blast. With that sort of setup, it means that 2 gunners and 1 well-shielded piece of junk can take out a squadron of TIE Fighters with ease.
Easy, you call that easy?
Yeah, I do, because we see the Rebels taking advantage advantage of this weakness dozens of times. And remember, it wasn't like it was impossible for TIEs to have shields. Vader's personal TIE X-1 had a shield, but I'm guessing the Emperor was too cheap to pony up for the rank and file to be protected like his moody apprentice. So the pilots can't see in order to defend themselves against attacks, and their ships are built like giant moving targets, made worse by the lack of shields. But there's one last feature that I want to add to this pile of failed engineering. This. That iconic sound that I mentioned before? Yep, that's gonna get someone killed. You see, in close proximity dogfights, like the ones that we see in Star Wars, and the ones that we saw during the real-life World War II, control of the battle is everything. The beginning of an aerial dogfight is known as the merge, and history has shown time and again that the pilot who controls the merge ultimately gets the first shots in, and is therefore exponentially more likely to win the battle. This is most often accomplished via a smart use of radar, reading the position of the enemy and then getting your ships into the ideal position to attack before you engage in battle. Merge is controlled, you win. You know what's really gonna ruin your element of surprise there, though? Let's just say that TIE fighters weren't going to be super helpful on a stealth mission. Of course, all of this is ignoring the fact that in space, none of these ships would be making sound, but I'm playing by the movies rules, so I'm just going to go with it. If they're indeed as loud and screeching as we hear in the movies, their arrival on the battlefield would be noticed long before they were able to get into attack position, thereby giving up any opportunity to control the merge and dictate the flow of battle. Any way you look at it, the Imperial TIE fighter was an impossible, poorly built, dumb, unshielded, idiotic, low visibility, stupid aircraft. Ironically, in their desire to create an efficient, mass-producible dogfighter, they created something that was the epitome of Imperial waste. A disaster that could have been averted if they had just spared a bit more thought and spent a bit more money per ship. In fact, here's a thought experiment. During the final seconds of Luke's trench run in A New Hope, Darth Vader, flanked by 2 other TIE fighters, lands a shot that takes out R2-D2. He's about to take the killing blow on Luke's ship when the Millennium Falcon surprises them all from above, swooping in to land a single shot on the left TIE fighter. This destroys it immediately, causing Darth's other support to get distracted. He loses track of his proximity to Darth and bumps their ships together, sending Vader flying out of the trench. All of it gives Luke the opening he needs to land the killing blow, destroying the Death Star, saving the planet of Yavin 4 and the rebel base on there, and changing the course of the war forever. Now, consider if even one of the changes that we've mentioned to the TIE fighters could have been implemented. If the TIEs had better visibility above the pilot, like an open glass canopy, it's likely Darth Vader or one of his flanks would have been able to see the Millennium Falcon coming, evade its fire, and stay in formation to kill Luke. If the ships had more windows on the side and less view-obstructing wings, the pilot to Darth's right wouldn't have lost track of his periphery and would have avoided swerving into Darth's ship. And if the basic TIE fighters had been equipped with literally any amount of shielding, that one singular laser strike from the Falcon wouldn't have destroyed the first fighter, only damaging it, which would have given them the extra seconds they needed to take down Luke. At that point, the Death Star would have remained intact and destroyed Yavin 4, killing Princess Leia and all the other rebellion leadership on the planet. On top of that, military mastermind Grand Moff Tarkin would still be alive with the Death Star as his flagship, strengthening Imperial strategy against any remaining rebel cells throughout the galaxy. That right there would have changed the course of Star Wars history forever. Mostly for the worse, but hey, at least it would have spared us the horror that was the rise of Skywalker.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Instead, the Empire blew it, all because they wanted to save a couple extra bucks on their planes. But hey, if you're like us and you think way too much about the military strategy and economics of a galaxy far, far away, why don't you check out our theory talking about how destroying the Death Star would have thrown the galactic economy into turmoil, ruining billions of lives. It's an older theory, but it definitely checks out. Or if you want something more recent, check out our video talking about the problems with Baby Yoda. Sorry, being that cute for that long would be totally dangerous. And if you want more Star Wars theories in the future, crash into that subscribe button like a TIE fighter that's been shot with a single blaster bolt. Until then, remember, it's all just a theory. A film theory. And cut.